Hi again, it's Ryan. It's been a while since I've done anything with this thing, so let's do a little bit of a recap before we move forward and look at what I've done since the end of the last video. The end of the last video, I had the LCD screen installed. Here's all the bundles of wires. We'll talk more about those when we get to the point of installing them. You can see I put the expansion port back in, and the keyboard cable is reinstalled, and I've got the back pulled off because it was easier. It's going to be easier to get the CPU board back in with this pulled off, but I also wanted to point a couple other things out. One of those is the LCD screen needs 12 volts of power. So does the speaker and the little fan that I'm going to mount. So I had originally planned on running some wire from the CPU board over here because my thought was at the time, hey, I got to pull 5 volts off the CPU board to power the SD to IEC that's going to go in. So I might as well just pull the 12 volt at the same time. But then I started thinking and remembered that the SX's original internal CRT and speaker used 12 volts, and that's what this line is that comes from the power supply back here. So I thought, well, instead of running other wires from the CPU board, we'll just use these existing wires. They'll get us over here to this side, and I can make a little splitter there to send the 12 volt power to the 3 different places it's going to go. A couple other things I want to mention is coming off of the TFT board over here, we got these 3 wires that go to the LCD screen, obviously, and then we've got these other ones. The green ones down here go to the ROM select function, and I'm not planning on using that at the moment, so eventually I think I'll get a Jiffy DOS for this thing, but I don't have it right now. So I went ahead and attached the wires to the connector here just so that when I get around to doing that, it's all set and ready to go. The other 3 wires here, this blue one, the black one, and the yellow one, come back here to the back. Now, the blue wire here is the drive reset, and that solders on right here to the serial jack. The yellow wire is the computer reset, and that attaches here. On the actual installation instructions, I think the idea was to be able to install this without taking the computer completely apart. So in the instructions, it says to just pull this connector off here and kind of stick the wire in here on the connector. But since I had everything apart, it just made more sense just to solder it onto the pin behind. And the black wire here goes to the drive select jumpers. So this is what's going to allow the circuitry for the SX-64's Ultra Reset to change the drive numbers. I think that's all to mention on the case and what's installed here right now. So I'm going to grab the CPU board and let's take a look at that real quick. Okay, so here's the CPU board, and just a couple things to note. First off, you see the big red wire over here. This is going to provide power to the SD to IEC, and that is just soldered on to the power connector here in the back. And these other wires here, you can see, are attached to the SIDFX. Now, I went back and forth on whether or not to even use that in this build because, well, lots of reasons. The reason I ended up deciding to use it is because I'm planning on using this in places where, if I've got a game or something going on, there's going to be other people around. I don't really want to play it with the sound coming out of the speaker, so I wanted to be able to have headphones. And if I'm going to have headphones, I want to be able to have stereo. So, or at least dual mono. And this was the easiest way to do that. So, this just attaches into the socket where the SID normally sits. You see here in socket 1, I've got a regular SID. In socket 2, I've got an ARM SID. And these wires here just connect to the back of the board. And I've soldered those on, but when you purchase the SIDFX, it actually comes with these 3 grabbers. So you would plug this in here and then use these little grabbers. I don't know how well you can see that, if you're familiar with these grabbers or not. And you just grab onto the pins. And this is designed, I think, mostly for people who don't want to have to solder in order to install things. Installation would be a lot easier with it, absolutely. But, and I think it would be fine if you were just installing this in a regular 64 that was going to sit on your desk and not go anywhere. But because this is in a portable computer and it's going to be carried around and jostled and stuff, I was just worried about those things coming loose or interfering with other stuff in the case. So I thought, I'm just going to go ahead and solder the wires directly to the board, to the pins on the underside. So that's what this is. Looking at the SIDFX, this port over here goes to the headphone jack. And I'll talk about the headphone jack probably in another video when I talk about installing it. And then these 2 are for these 2 switches that come with the SIDFX. And the purpose of those is to select different functions of the device. I don't really anticipate needing to do that much because I don't really feel like I need to fiddle around with it. If I was running demos and stuff like that and I really wanted stereo and I really wanted to tweak which, the sound coming out of each one and all that, which is really the purpose of this device, is to allow you to do those things, then yeah, I would install them and try to find some place to mount them. But I don't really think I'm going to be doing that. So, and they are optional. You don't have to install them in order for the device to work. So I'm just going to leave those off. If it turns out that I absolutely find that I need them, I can always install them later. They just plug in and then I just have to find some place to mount the switch. But right now, I don't anticipate needing them. This would be a lot easier, honestly, if I had used the SIDFX before in another setup. But I've never used this before. I really have no experience with it at all. So yeah, I absolutely might find that I need to come back and add, at least one of those switches. I don't really know, but we'll find out. Okay, the CPU board is in, so let's talk about the next step. That is to reinstall the I/O board. Now, you'll see here, this installs by this edge connector. So it goes in like this and then pushes in to that connector that's on the CPU board. This is a common point of failure for these machines because over time the board can work loose. They were only attached to the case through this hole and a little plastic peg. And those pegs can come out. If that comes out, there's nothing keeping this attached to the case, so it could over time wiggle its way out and then you get failure. So let me show you putting this in. It just slips in this little slot at the bottom of the case. Get it lined up with the connector. And just push it all the way in. Okay. Now the spot where that plastic peg would go is right here. And I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but this stand here has a fair bit of wiggle room to it. Right, you can see the whole, if I do this, the whole floppy drive board is wiggling back and forth too, because it's also attached. When I took all of these boards out, I took those plastic pegs out too, because half of them were already out. And I've been replacing them with small bolts with a lock washer and the nut, obviously. And that's going to hold these boards in place much more securely than those plastic pegs would. Commodore obviously used the plastic pegs because they were cheaper and they were a whole lot faster to install. You could just put the board in, snap them in place, and get it down the assembly line. But I'm in no big rush, and so I'm putting the bolts in because I think it's going to be long-term a more solid solution. But there's something else too. Just to make absolutely certain this thing doesn't wiggle off, I designed and printed this on my 3D printer. And all it is just something. It's got some holes here that will match the holes there, and it's got a clip on the end that will slip over the CPU board. So this just slips on top of the I/O board. Misses all the connectors and everything, and then it will clip on to the CPU board. So even if for some reason, if this screw ever came out for whatever reason, this is going to hold it in place. So let me go ahead and get that attached. Okay, so let's take a look at where we're at now. I've got all the boards back in, and I've done a bit of the wiring. Now you can see here at P18, this is the internal video connector. I made a new end for this. So all of these wires run through here. That's another great thing about this little bracket for the I/O board, is it also helps to route your wires. So I ran the wires through here, over here, and so those are right here. I also added the wires onto P18 for the audio and the audio ground. The other thing I did over here is, here's the 12-volt supply from the power supply. You'll see I made a little pigtail for it. So I'm going to send this power off into 3 different places. The LCD screen, which I made a little connector for, so that's easy to remove if I need to. 2 of these will go to, 1 power and 1 ground will go to the new speaker, and 1 power and 1 ground will go to the small little fan that I'm going to mount in here. And I honestly don't know if that little fan is going to really do anything, because it's going to be way over here when all the heat is really being generated back inside here and over here. So I don't really know if it's going to help much, but can't hurt. Now, I was a little concerned about whether or not I was going to be pulling too much power here by splitting it into 3 different devices. But this power line brought power to that old power-hungry CRT screen and the speaker. I'm using that same amount of power to power a much less power-hungry LCD screen, a less power-hungry speaker, and a tiny little fan that's not going to pull much current at all. So I don't think I'm going to have a problem here, even though I'm splitting this into the power source for 3 different devices. I think between the LCD screen, the new speaker, and the fan, I think I'm still going to be significantly below what the power usage was for that CRT and the speaker that came with that. So the next thing to do is I need to figure out how I'm going to mount the speaker and the fan in here. And what I'm doing at the moment is I'm designing a 3D printed bracket, basically, and it's going to screw into these 2 holes here that were left over from where the CRT unit mounted, and it's going to have a little lip on the front that's just going to slide underneath this, so it'll just slide underneath and then be screwed down in the back, because there aren't any other screw holes up here. And again, one of the kind of driving principles of this project is don't do anything irreversible, and that includes drilling holes in the case. So not going to do that. So I'm going to build that, and it's just basically, it's going to be a plate that's going to attach in here, and then I'm going to have a stand on it that's going to lift up the speaker and the fan closer to the top of the case, so that, you know, the fan would be more effective up there, and, you know, the speaker will probably sound a little bit better being up closer to the vents than, you know, buried down inside the machine. I'm afraid to get some echo or something, I don't know. But so it's going to raise those up to be closer to the top of the case. I just need to do some measuring and figure out exactly how high that stand needs to be, and do some printing on that, and then we'll get that in here and get everything all wired up. Okay, now let me show you this. This is something I 3D printed and put together, and this is the bracket that's going to hold the speaker and the small fan. And this goes in, there's a little cross piece on the case. This will slide under that, sit down, and then on these 2 holes here is where it will attach to the existing holes in the case from the original CRT unit. The speaker then will mount under here. The fan will mount under here. So let me go ahead and get that installed. Okay, so going handheld a minute here to show you the installation. See, the lip of this slid under here and then was screwed on in the back. It's kind of hard to see the screws way back there in the back. This can be installed, obviously, with the drive board and the I/O board in place. It's a little tricky to get to those screws, but it can be done. But it couldn't be done, I don't think, if you had the speaker and the fan installed first, which is why I installed the bracket first, and now I'm installing the other components. You'll see the fan is installed here, and it's got these little silicone doohickeys. I know that's a great technical term, but these came with the fan, and they just stick up through and pull up through the hole to hold it in place. I thought I'd give it a shot. They seem to work really well, so I'm going to go ahead and just use those instead of screws or small bolts. And then once the fan is in place, I'll do the speaker, which will be a little more complicated. The fan has the cable here that came with it. It's just a 2-prong power cable, and it had this adapter end that came with it. So I just soldered that onto my power lines, and I'll just use that to provide power for the fan. All right, here it is all installed. You'll notice there's only 3 bolts holding the speaker in, because there's just not really a good way of getting that 4th one in there, but I think it's plenty sturdy enough. Here's the amplifier board. You'll notice we got these top 2 wires run to the speaker. Here's our power cord coming in from the power board in the back. You'll see it splits off, 2 wires coming here going to the amplifier board. We've got 2 more that come over here and go to the speaker, or go to the fan, I'm sorry. And then another 2 that come over here and connect up, and those go to the new screen. So everything is hooked up except, see this black and green wire over here, that's the audio that comes in from the CPU board over here. And I originally was going to just solder those to the bottom of the connectors, but the way this board is built, there's not really a good way of doing that. So I'm going to get a 3.5mm jack, put on the end of it, and then that will just plug in right here. And then that'll all be done. So really, all that's left is to get the disk drive back in with the SD to IEC and all that stuff. So I think this is probably a good place to stop for this video, and I'll see you next time.